For such a long time, I have been avoiding this. And I don't know why. Fear of being judged, fear of my friends not accepting me, fear of going against what society says. And what this is my testimony to finding God. And a lot of people who know me when I was younger may have never seen this coming, that I would find God. My friends, my family, my mum, she's a believer, hasn't always been found God later in her life. So to many, this is a surprise. And for such a long time, I've been putting this off, even though in my heart, I wanted to share this so badly. And when I think about it, I think that it's so interesting that in society, we can talk about taking drugs on the weekend, drinking and acting like a fool. Yet, if someone brings up the topic God, everyone stares at you, judges you, and calls you crazy. But if you intoxicate yourself or you do something bad, it's celebrated. But if you try and be of faith and to live a better life, you're delusional. Yet there's people out there that still believe in the spiritual side, but more universal, and they're celebrated. So why is it that people go from raging atheists to spiritual to finding God, especially in this time? I can't give you the reason for that, but I can share my testimony on why I have become such a believer and had so much faith. I can only describe this from the start of my journey. See, I was brought into this world by a single mum who has spina bifida, which means she's never been able to walk. My father left when I was born. All I know is his name. He paid child support for a little bit and then just claimed he couldn't afford it. The crazy thing about this is that from a young age, I always felt so different. I always felt so mad at times. Why do the other kids have normal parents? Why can they afford all these things? Why are we on Centrelink? Why do we struggle to afford things? Why aren't we eating tonight? Why can't I have that Christmas present? Why don't we have a normal family? So from a young age, I always felt different. And having a mum with spina bifida made me feel like I needed to support her and I wanted to support her. So the beginning of my life was not easy. And moving through the years in life, I was pretty independent. I didn't feel like luck was a thing. I didn't believe that God was real. I didn't believe in anything more than that my circumstance in life was difficult and that I was hard done by, and that people who have lots of things in life are just lucky. Today, I don't believe that. So growing up, I was born in Canberra. I moved to Orange at a young age with my mum so we could be around my nan and pop and cousins, and that was amazing. But going to primary school, I always felt different. I always felt like I didn't have a normal sense of life, I guess. And from that to high school and being told that I was dumb or not smart or that I just wasn't hitting the right results on tests, and then being told that I'd never do certain things in life that I have achieved today. I had this sense that the world was out to get me, and if God was real, he hated me. Later on, as I went through high school, I remember many occasions of feeling different, unlucky, and working from a young age, from working on cherry yards to getting my first proper job at McDonald's, to really just wanting to work all the time to prove I was worthy, to prove that I can, create a life that I never got to live, maybe. I was always grateful for my mum. She's such a hard worker. She's such an amazing person. My biggest inspiration in life, for someone who couldn't walk, she learned how to do skiing in a wheelchair, and she started a little business on the side, enough to get us by. She had she has the best personality ever, and she's the most loving and kind person. But times are hard. And early on memories, I remember going to Centrelink and her crying in Centrelink because they wouldn't approve a $200 payment for us to go get food and to help with bills, because we were in government housing at the time. And we were lucky enough that my cousin worked there, so she was able to help us get that through so that we could afford to eat that week. And that was the early memories. So growing up was hard, and getting to a point just after high school where I was like, I was known in this country town of Orange as the dumb kid, as, just a nice kid who wasn't smart enough. And people pitied me or felt sorry for me. And it wasn't until high school ended, and I worked at McDonald's for multiple years in high school, and I proved the concept that I can learn things. It might have taken me a little bit longer at the time, but I was still developing, I was still learning, I was still growing. But I proved the point that I can achieve whatever I want to achieve, because I went from crew member to supervisor. And for someone who's dumb or couldn't understand things, I seemed to understand how to be pretty efficient and proactive and get things done. So I remember as soon as we're in the last year of high school, and unfortunately my mum had a fall. And during that fall, she had an injury and she wasn't able to essentially walk on her crutches anymore. So she was in hospital for around 6 months, which felt like a year. During this period of time, I stayed with my friend's family. I was getting into mischief. I was driving my car on my learners. I got caught drink driving on my learners and spent the night in the cell, which is the one of the turnaround points in my life. I was very lucky for it not to be as serious as it was, although very serious still. I remember being in the police station and the police officers calling my mom, and she just saying on the phone that she was disappointed, and that sitting with me. And I spent the night in the cell. I got picked up in the morning, I got taken back home, and then from there I went and spent 2 weeks with my uncle. I was living with my auntie as well, but after getting arrested, I became too much for my auntie, and then I got sent to go live with my uncle for 2 weeks as a punishment. And so for 2 weeks, my uncle would tell me that I was a waste of space, that I wasn't good enough, that I've ruined my life, and that I wasn't a man. And maybe fair play. I did something wrong. I made the wrong decisions. But to be told those things again and again, and to feel like a failure in already having an extremely hard life, I found really unnecessary. And that was the starting point of anxiety and depression for me. And then an entry point into alcoholism and drugs. So after those 2 weeks, I went back to Orange. When I was with my uncles in a place called Dubbo. And if you know Dubbo, you know it's a bit of a wild place. So as I got back to Orange, I essentially started the journey to bettering my life. So I decided to really double down and commit more on my education and try and work harder in the last year to push a little bit harder and try and get better results and do the best I can. I worked harder in my role at McDonald's, and I enjoyed my time. I became more social, I became more open. I just started to have more social skills, essentially. And I started to make more friends. But I was still known and labeled as that kid who wasn't smart enough. So high school finished, I got a job in a bar. I started studying to be a personal trainer. I worked at a bottle shop, and I was just working. I was a hard worker. And walkers are pretty known for being hard workers. So as I was doing these roles, I just remember being in this bar one time, and a kid from school came through it. Well, a now adult, one of the kids from school was in a year below me. This was a few years later, maybe 2 years later. During this time, I'd studied being a personal trainer. I was just about to finish, and he walked into this bar I was working into. He's like, "Hey Chris, how are you going? What's been happening? Blah, blah, blah." And I said, "Oh, I'm studying to be a personal trainer. I'm working all these jobs. I'm really looking forward to finishing this study so I can start my business and I can start to do some really cool things and be really successful." And I remember as I told him that I was just about to finish studying to be a personal trainer, he laughed in my face and he said, "You, a personal trainer?" Which in turn is obviously saying you're not going to be successful. And I said, "Yeah, me, a personal trainer." So I poured his beer, gave it to him, he paid the money, and that was an imprint on my mind that I was gonna show him that he was wrong about me. And that was one of the starting points to me proving to the world that I was capable. And as the year went on and I was just about to finish my personal training, my Cert 3 and 4. Back then it took around 12 months to do those things. Now it's like 6 weeks. But at the time I was still heavily drinking, I was smoking, funnily enough, I was taking drugs. But just a few months prior to finish my Cert 3 and 4, my Cert 4, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna stop doing those things, I'm gonna just change my life, I'm gonna get away from it, I'm gonna lead by example. And a friend of mine was really big in the party scene. He was only young, and you know, I used to see him every weekend, drink, take drugs, smoke, talk life. But leading up to me finishing this, where I started to change my life, stop drinking, stop taking drugs, stop smoking, he would message me every few weeknights or weekends, and he'd be like, "Hey man, let's catch up. It's been ages." And I was like, "Okay, cool, yep. No worries." Like maybe another time. And he'd ask me again and again and again. And I'd say, "Look, man, I'm just really busy studying the Cert 3 and 4 in fitness. I'm trying to finish it all up. I just don't have the time." And then one morning I woke up and I see this post from a friend saying, "Rest in peace," so forth. "I can't believe this has happened." So I message my friend. I say, "Hey man, like what's happening? What is this real?" And unfortunately, he died from a drug overdose. And that was probably the first time that I experienced a friend passing away. And it was a moment in time where I started the process of blaming myself for his death. I remember being at the funeral and I remember seeing him, like the casket get taken away, and I just felt so much shame and so much guilt that I just didn't make time to spend with him as much as I could have, because I was fixated on myself. And it made me realize that, you know, life is short and that we have to make time for the people we love. And so being exposed to that, it took me years to overcome the shame and guilt I felt because I blamed myself for his death. What if I went back there and saw him before it happened. Could I tell him to ease off? Could I tell him to take a break? Could I tell him to just get away from it for a bit? And this would play again and again in my mind, and it made me realize that life is short. Moving forward, a few months later, another friend passed away from suicide. And then my friend group, we started to just see more people in our hometown just pass away from mental health. And at this time, I didn't actually realize that I was anxious, that I was depressed, that I was having suicidal ideation, thoughts arise. And I remember I met my partner at the time, and she was talking to me. We were a few months into the relationship, and she was talking to me, and I said, "Oh, something's wrong with me. Like, I just don't know what's happening." And she said, "Well, let me just do a quick, I've done my training in mental health assessment. Let's just see what comes up." And she asked me these questions, and I was like, yep. And then I soon realized from the results that I was highly depressed, severely depressed, and severely anxious. And that the suicidal thoughts that I was having wasn't normal. And that was the starting point to me realizing that I had to work on my mindset. I had to seek that as my first step to change. I was working out, but I wasn't looking after my mind. And so I started to see this psychologist was really a big turning point. Midway through me going through this, my partner and myself, we broke up, she was really the first person that I ever understood what love felt like. And I knew I was always loved by friends and family, but there was points that I couldn't hug people. I couldn't say I love you. I felt so closed off. But having this partner somehow opened my heart. And then when we broke up, it was if someone just took my soul from me, which really started to cement a deeper belief in me that God wasn't real. Why would God put me through all these things in life? Why would God take away my friends? Why would a God take away my partner? Why would a God make me feel so much pain? And as I was going through this, I started to dive deeper into alcohol and drugs again, smoking. I started to lose so much weight, where my clients would be so worried about me. And my friends would get calls from me saying I'm on the side of the road or I'm at the top of a cliff. And as I was going to see this psychologist, it was helping, but I still wasn't fully honest. Because if I was honest, I was afraid I was going to get put into a loony bin, into a mental health ward and wrapped up. So I had some discernment around that. And there was one night where I was in my car on the side of the road, and I called a friend and I said, "I need your help. I don't think I can be here anymore." And so he came down and he sat with me in the car, and I had no emotions. I felt nothing. And he was crying. And something he said triggered a thought in my mind. And it was as if this was given to me, this thought. And it was, could I be more? And I said it again in my mind as it's now 12 o'clock midnight. In my mind, I was like, could I be more? And as my friend's down right next to me, and he said, let's work through this. And I just said, okay. And that moment in time was the defining moment where I started to choose to change. I started to think, what if there was something more out there for me? And from that moment on, I started to go and seek new experiences, hiking in mountains, training more, looking after my mindset more, doubling down on my nutrition, spending time with different people, still having my close friends, but seeking new experiences through new conversations of what do you believe in life? Like, what are your beliefs? Why do you run a business? Why do you do this? And as I was coming to the end of the period of time where I was working through this breakup, I just remember being given a book because I decided I want to read a book. I've never really read books properly. So I messaged a friend of mine and I said, what's the best book that you can recommend to share with me that I can start to read as a good entry point? And he recommended a book called The Alchemist. And if you've ever read The Alchemist, it is the best book ever. I love it. It is just this book that just allows you to see that everything is working for you at all times. So I read this book. I got the book given off. It was so crazy. I got this book from someone at the gym that I worked at as I put a post out looking for it. And she said, keep it. That's yours. I've got a spare one. And I read this book, and it just talks about omens, signs around us all the time. It talks about wherever you are is giving you a lesson or a realization, or it's on the path of your own journey. And then you get to the end of the goal, what you think is your treasure in life or your outcome, and then you realize the lesson of what it really is. The lesson that gives you the outcome that you never knew you needed. And that book was the reason why I booked a one-way flight to London. And from London, from the point of reading this book, I started to think, wow, like spirituality might be real. And I started to look around me in life, and I just started to notice things were working out for me. I can be lucky if I choose to be lucky. I can see signs around me if I want to see signs around me. So I booked this flight to London. And I remember I was just, what if it doesn't work out? Friends were saying to me, and I was like, well, I'm just going to go for 6 months. And I remember going over there for this fresh start in life. And I remember being there, landing, just getting off the plane in London and realizing that this was my new life. This is the start of the journey. This is the start of the adventure. And as I found my way to Buckingham Palace, after I checked in my bags in a hotel and I went all around London, I was just so amazed at how beautiful the buildings were, how interesting the people were, how different London was to Orange, from a country town to a huge multicultural city. And I finally felt free. The first time in my life, I felt free. I felt like I had a chance to redefine who I was, to change my narrative, to really live a new story. And so over the next little while, I would work in multiple hotels and restaurants around London, some of the best hotels and restaurants around London. I met over 150 different celebrities. I got selected to serve the Queen. I served people like James McAvoy, met Leonardo DiCaprio, Leonardo DiCaprio and Will Smith, Margot Robbie, multitudes of people. I work in multi-million-dollar events where there was ice bars, there was people twirling from the roof, to billionaire events where the carpet was fully changed and the drapes or the curtains were changed, and it cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to do. And through these events of moving overseas, traveling around Europe, seeing so many different things, doing things like the bull run in Spain, to jumping off cliffs in Croatia, to serving the most highest elite people in the world, and working in a disability care centre, to being a stage crew for events around London, to running my online personal training business. I learned so much that the only limitations we have in life are ourselves, and that everyone has a story, and people are just hurt in this life. I started to formulate compassion. I started to formulate self-love and self-trust. And as I went through this, I had a partner at the time that I met in my home, my share house that I was in, and we shared multitudes of experiences around traveling, and obviously many challenges as well, which were huge lessons. But the one thing that really made me realize that I had a purpose in this world was one afternoon I was walking in the east side of London in a place called Leytonstone from a gym called Muscle Hut. And in this gym, I was lots of jack dudes. I was the skinniest guy there, but everyone's super nice. And anyway, I'm walking in the east side of London, walking back home from the gym. And I just remember asking myself, well, what am I going to do with my life when this visa runs out? Am I going to go back to Orange? Am I going to just get a degree, get a trade? Like, what am I going to do? And something in me clicked, and I was like, you know what? It'd be cool to create something that allowed people to understand how important travel is, how important mindset is, how important looking after your body through nutrition and training is, and how important experiences are. And then that kind of got me to the point of walking, and I was like, well, what could this thing be called, and what would it do? And it was as if lightning hit me, and it was like, travel fit. And this word was the start, travel fit. I didn't know what it was going to be. Was it going to be selling healthy food out of a van at festivals? Was it going to be travel fitness kits on the go? I had no idea. But what I did know is that that was the thing that I was going to pursue. I still had my PT business online that I was doing, and a few face-to-face sessions, but all I knew was that was the thing I was going to do. And so for the next few months, I would just start working on this as I'm traveling and living life, and the visa finally came to an end, and my partner at the time was from the Sunshine Coast, so she was moving back to the Sunshine Coast, and we made the decision that I would come to the Sunshine Coast to live as well. Now, the relationship fizzled out after maybe 3 months. But what I realized was that I was meant to come here. I'm still on the Sunshine Coast right now. Because over the next, it would be 8 years, around 8 years, six years. For 6 years, initially, once we broke up, I actually had nowhere to go. She said, take the car. And I said, where am I going to go? Where am I going to stay? She's like, I don't know, you have to figure it out. But gave me the car, so it was nice enough. I called a friend, had no home. And he said, you can stay here for a little bit until you find somewhere. I just started a personal training business. I had zero money coming in at that time. And I just remember there was no spare room, but there was this kid's room. So my housemates, my friend's housemate had, I think it might have been a young boy or young girl, I can't really remember. But anyway, they stayed with the mum, and I just slept on this kid's bed in this kid's room. And I remember looking at the wall, and I was like, I'm never gonna be here again. And from that point, it took me a few days, and I started to really dive into changing my financial situation and my circumstances. I had a week, and in a week I found a place to stay where I borrowed some money to stay there. And this would be a walk to the gym, and around 40 minutes every morning, maybe a little bit longer. But I'd get up at 3:30 to get myself ready for the day. And then I would go walk an hour, 40 minutes to an hour, to then go train my clients from 5 a.m. until 8 p.m. And then I'd come home. And at this time, I'd already given the car back, so I was walking everywhere. And then once I got back to my home with two other flatmates, I would read, I would work on my business, and then I would go to sleep. And it was a rinse and repeat cycle. Now, I wasn't making enough money to really live a large life. I had enough for the rent at my house and the rent at the gym because I'd gotten a bunch of clients on. And it was about maybe 6 weeks of doing this, working multitude of hours every day, Monday to Sunday, that at one point I was training someone and I'd lost a little bit of feeling in my left arm. And I thought, that's strange. And as I'm training this person, I'm like, okay, this is a bit weird, I'll work through it. And I worked through it. And then I went to train the second person, and then I just lost feeling in my arm, in my face, and my legs started to get a little bit weak. And I said, I've got to stop this session. I went and saw the gym manager, and I was like, hey, I'm feeling this and this is happening. And he's like, all right, let's call an ambulance. And then by the time the ambulance got to me, I pretty well had lost a decent amount of feeling in my left side. I was very dizzy, I felt sick, and they took me to hospital. And I just remember being in this ambulance, looking at the roof of this ambulance, and I was like, am I gonna die? And I said to myself, was it worth it working so much? And not just in this moment of working at this gym, but throughout my life, I've always worked so much. And I said, no, it wasn't. And so from that point, I was in the hospital for a night. The symptoms subsided. And then the next day, I went back to the gym and trained some clients. Now, you might say that's really dumb, and you'd be correct. But that moment, I started to reduce my workload, and I started to implement things like mindfulness. Every morning, meditations. I hated it so much, but it made a huge difference. It helped me regulate my state. That then opened the door to reading a book called Breaking the Habit of Being Yourself by Joe Dispenza. That started to make me realize that everything is energy around us. And that was a mix between spirituality and science to change your reality. So I had this little routine that I was doing in my mornings, and it was late 2018, maybe 2019, that this kind of happened. And I just remember starting to do this little routine, and things would just appear in my reality that I'd write down that I wanted to achieve. And I started to program my mind in so many ways that things would just happen. I started to have a really successful business with 100K a year. Everything I wanted started to appear. I started to get the partner that I wanted. And it was really interesting because that was my first realization of the belief of spirituality. And so over the next few years, I would dive deeper into the spiritual path of, the universe and so forth. And it wasn't until COVID appeared, and in a day, I lost all my clients, the gym shut down, and I had to restart from scratch. So I maneuvered to go online. I got a few clients on there. I started to train people in my garage, one-on-one in groups. And then I started to, in my spare time, because I had so much spare time, I started to learn more about different things, stock market, different shares, so forth. But what I did start to work on was the true concept of travel fit. I was still running Chris Walker Personal Training. I hadn't really dived into travel fit fully. I wanted to run a retreat. So when I was at the gym, before COVID came, I tried to run multiple retreats, but I kept failing. I couldn't get people to sign up. And then while I was in COVID and I had all this spare time, I started to learn about marketing and sales and how to get people to buy your tickets and so forth. Anyway, I started to get people to buy my tickets to this retreat. It was going to be in Byron Bay. But the problem was that COVID was still a thing. So the states would open up and then I'd book this thing and then the states would close and I'd cancel. This happened 4 times. 4 times I failed over the space of 2 years. And then it just got to the point where I was like, I'm just going to run this as a day retreat on the Sunshine Coast. From there, I ran this day retreat. We had 12 people attend and it was the beginning of Trail Fit. From there, I ran multiple community events all around the Sunshine Coast, breathwork events, running clubs, workouts, anything and everything, coffee catch-ups. And then I kept running these day retreats, which started to become a really big success. And then during this time of going this was all fairly well through COVID. Just as COVID was pretty much just in the clear a few years later, I was just so exhausted and so tired that I was like, you know what, that's it. I'm just going to get a normal job. And so I got a normal job. I worked as a receptionist in a hospital and I realized I hated it. And then I got offered a role at a gym. So I took it. I was just coaching some mornings and then did enough hours there to take over the reception hospital job. And then I got offered another role at another gym. And then I started to expand into both gyms' responsibilities. And in one, I started to build systems and processes in their back end around emails and texts and customer care. And then in the other one, I was really diving deeper into my coaching even further. And then one day, a year and a half later, I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm just not made to work for someone. It took a year and a half to learn that. And at this point, I had no money in my bank, 0. Had enough each week, each fortnight I got paid, enough to pay whatever. I was working more and earning less. So, and even at the time I was renting a storage unit for my old gym equipment, and so all my money was just going to bills. Anyway, I decided, I was like, I have to leave these jobs because I was just feeling so anxious about being at them. I felt trapped. I felt like I was being controlled. And I made the decision. I had 2 weeks of offboarding myself from those areas. And I was trying to sell workshops to corporates, but I was just not having much luck, a few here, a few there. And then anyway, I was like, I'm just going to do DoorDash at night. I'm just going to deliver food. And then during the day, I'll try and sell workshops and all different bits and bobs around the Trail Fit thing. And at the time, I had a friend who was I was lucky enough to be mentored by them, and they knew I had no money and they were looking after me and just helping me get my life back together again. So as I was door dashing at night and I was trying to pitch all these things during the day unsuccessfully, it got so bad that I fell behind in my bills so much that I was thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars negative in my accounts. And I maxed out a credit card. And I was so tired from doing the DoorDash, I had nothing left. And I was just sitting in my car one night. I was like, God, if you are real, show me. Show me something. And nothing happened. So a few nights later, I was in my room. And it was as if I woke up randomly throughout the night and I looked outside and I felt something was different. It was as if there was this negative energy outside. And all the lights were outside around our neighborhood except for my room and our house. And I just remember feeling so sick as I walked towards my door, as if there was something out there. And I started to notice my lights were flickering. So I sat down and I said, God, if this is you, go really bright. And it went so bright, I've never seen those lights go that bright ever before. And I get goosebumps talking about this. I don't know if you just saw that, but the light just flickered. Anyway, And I said, go really dark for no and really bright for yes. And as crazy as this sounds, for the first time in my life, I believed in God because I had a conversation with him. And I just asked questions, and it will go bright or it will go dark. And you won't believe this, but I asked one thing particularly about something happening in my business that I was just doing to make a little bit of money in. And I said, am I going to have this happen? And it went so bright, and I couldn't believe it. Because it was a really good friend of mine. And the next day, at this time, I got into a better situation, but still pretty hard. But I woke up the next day and I called a friend and I said, man, throughout this process, I'd been applying for mining jobs, trying to get just a six-figure income to try and sort my life out again. Anyway, I was 4 interviews deep. I did the physical assessments, and I was about to accept this role in Snowy Hydro as a health and wellness manager, essentially head gym management kind of role. And anyway, I called my friend just as I was about to have an interview that day, and I called my friend and I said, I don't think I can take the role. And I feel inside that I can make this work with this business that I've got going. Well, and he said, well, you know what to do and listen to your gut. And I said, wait, there's something I have to do. And I called my mum and I said, hey mum, I just want you to know these things. I don't want you to worry about me. I want you to trust me, and I want you to know I'm going to be okay. And I said, and she said, don't, like, I understand, I do. I just worry. I said, don't worry. I just need you to let me know that you know I'm going to be okay. And she said it. I know you'll be okay. I know you'll fix it. I trust you. I believe in you. And it was as if magic. After that call, I received a contract to be paid $2,000, which offsetted a lot of my bills that I had to pay. And then from there, I just continued to build more income through my business. And then I grew multitudes of team members in this business, and I opened another business, and I opened another business. And the thing that happened just before, as I was starting to grow this one business, I just felt my faith for God and my hunger for God was just increasing again and again. And throughout this period, I was telling my friends about it, and some of them thought I was crazy. They thought I was mad. One of them said they were worried that I was going into psychosis. And anyway, I called another friend of mine a few months into the business starting to stabilize, and I was like, hey man, like, I know that you go to church. I've had this encounter with God. What do I do? How do I do this thing? And I went, and he's like, man, let's catch up. So we went for a coffee. I met him and his partner at church, and that was really the start of my faith journey. A few months after, I decided to get baptized. So I got baptized with my mum's friends who lived up here, who were preachers. And my whole life prior to this moment of being baptized, I have felt so empty. I had felt so alone. I'd felt like I had never had a father in my life. there was so much chaos in my heart. There was so much doubt in my mind. There was so much sadness. And I remember being baptized, and it was if my heart had softened so much. I felt a feeling that is beyond peace, that is beyond bliss, it's beyond gratitude, it's beyond contentment. I felt so much overwhelming love in my heart. I felt my nervous system ease. I felt my mind stop running for the first time in my life properly. I felt free, loved, safe. And I realized that my whole life I'd been slowly but surely trying to, whether I knew it or not, when I was traveling, I'd go to churches to look at the churches, but I'd feel so much peace in the church and a service. There were points in my life where I shouldn't have been here. There is so much that I have achieved in my life at this point. I've run an event with 30,000 people involved online called the Do a Good Deed Challenge. I have met certain people in life that I'm friends with today that statistically I shouldn't have met. I have achieved levels of success that statistically I shouldn't have achieved. I realized that every moment in my life I was looked after by God. And it all hit me that the love that I was seeking from a father that was never around was blocking my view that I had a father looking after me the whole time. And from that point, I've never felt the same. I can't hate anyone. I can't have resentment to anyone. I get mad, I get stressed, as every person does. But when I made that choice to commit to God, that I chose to believe in the Holy Spirit, Jesus, God, Trinity, my life changed forever. And there's no words that will ever be able to describe it. And since that point, I've had the most success in my life. Prior to that, there was just years of feeling empty, achieving things, feeling empty, achieving things, feeling empty. And now I just have so much gratitude for everything. I have so much faith in knowing that you could take it all away and that God is all I want. I used to search for so much in the world to fill the gap that was in my heart. But that gap the whole time was for God. And I just can never not have that in my life now. And I've experienced it all. Raging atheist, spirituality, realizing so much about the spirituality space. You have so much spiritual ego of like, you're not spiritual enough, you've got to be like this, drop your ego, X, Y, and Z. Like I've never been as much of a good person as I am right now compared to before. And that's not to say, look at me. It's to say, I've never felt so much love in my heart, which has allowed me to not judge people, to look after others, to follow a moral compass that feels right, to be kind to all people, to do the right thing, to work hard, but always give back. And that's where we come today. In this moment right now, where I run a couple of companies and I have well over 30 people between those businesses, and I support people's livelihoods. And do you know the craziest thing is, even in times of crisis, like a few months ago, or last year in November, late November, I was in Bondi, and it's crazy. I was in Bondi, and I was there during the shooting, and I was just sitting on the beach, and I was like, what a beautiful day. And I get up and I'm going to leave. I was there for a week, and I just hear these fireworks. I think to myself, wow, that's so strange. It's daytime. Why are there fireworks? And a girl comes running over, yelling, he's got a gun, he's got a gun. Someone else runs over, they've got a gun, they've got guns. And the fireworks don't stop. And I see thousands of people running. Thousands of people crying and worrying and being scared. And in that moment, I felt that I just calmed down. I just became mindful. It was as if I was looked after in that moment. And as everyone was running and I was moving along, I was very mindful of people that, you know, in these moments, people can be sporadic and reactive, and as you would be. And I got to a certain point on the boardwalk and the gunshots are still going again and again and again and again. And I see some lady to one side of me screaming and crying. Picture in my head still is with me today. And I think to myself, oh, there's probably kids and older people back there. So I start to make my way back, and it was so interesting because I had this tick list, and I was like, all right, safety, check in on people. And I get back to the park and the gunshots are still flying, and there's bullet holes through cars and blood on the cement. And I look up at the park and I see things that shouldn't be seen. I saw a dead body with blood dripping off its hand as the body was laid on a bench seat. I see someone bleeding out of their head. I see people crying and screaming. And as I'm checking in on people, seeing if they're okay, I see this all appear in front of me. And I call a friend and I say, hey, this has just happened. I'm coming up to your house. And another person runs up and says, there's someone else with a gun. And so I got out of that scene, that situation, and I got to my friends and I broke down. And I was broken, traumatized. From there's been so much craziness. But the reason why I'm sharing this isn't to say, look at me. It's that during moments that you see the worst in all these people, I still had love for everyone. I didn't hate anyone for what had happened. I only had love for people. I knew the situation was horrible. But it was as if there was just, I had no choice in my heart. It was as if my heart was still understanding. And it was horrible, and it was an experience that I obviously am not condoning. But what I'm saying is that how can a human have compassion for people still like that? And so working even on from that moment to today, there's been so many multitudes of events happen, people doing me over in business, things going wrong, and again, still having a soft heart. It's because God has blessed me with love and compassion for people. He's blessed me with understanding. He's blessed me with understanding. So much more than I'll ever be able to understand. That is the peace that I have in my heart. Is that it is the center of, and I don't want you to take this away in a different context, that what I'm trying to say is that there has been so much bad in my life that I hated the world for all the bad things that happen. But why at this point, in this time, since finding God, do I have peace in my heart still? Why don't I hate the world for all the bad things that happen? And I think it's because I've been blessed with God's love. And that is how I found God, why I believe in Him, and how, looking back at everything that's happened in my life, I could always see that He's been there protecting me in all circumstances, even in Bondi. Yeah. Thanks so much for listening. And yeah, I guess if you got questions, let me know.